Good evening. My name is Brian Konkol. I serve as Dean of Hendricks Chapel and Professor of Practice at Syracuse University. And welcome to Matters That Matter. This is an online conversation series where we amplify intentional conversation about religion, spirituality, values, belief, and motivation. We invite guests to share about choices made, difficulties encountered, and commitments solidified. This evening, our guest is Sharon Kugler, who serves as University Chaplain at Yale University. Kugler is the first woman, first layperson, and first Roman Catholic to hold the position of Yale University Chaplain. Prior to her appointment at Yale in 2007, she was University Chaplain at Johns Hopkins University and has also served in an assortment of other higher education and healthcare positions. Kugler served as president of the Association of College and University Religious Affairs from 2000 to 2002, and the National Association of College and University Chaplains from 1999 to 2001. She earned a master's degree at Georgetown University and studied at the Jesuit School of Theology and St. Mary's Seminary and University. Welcome to the Syracuse University campus community, Chaplain Sharon Kugler. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
So I gave a small portion of your vocational journey. It could be described as exceptional and perhaps even a bit unconventional. You've written about this a few times, and I want to give you back a quote from your own writing. It says, a great exercise, right? Hearing your own reading. I have been fortunate to have doors open to me by people who trusted more than I did that personality and instinct could be as valid a route to ministry as ordination. What a wonderful line. Can you share more about how you navigated the norms of ministry and embraced your own unique path to where you find yourself now?
Sure. I grew up in a pretty traditional Roman Catholic family and had my own sort of tug of war about what my faith would look like as an adult. I had some issues with the church around women's ordination and reproductive rights and those kinds of things, but I was mostly so taken by the social justice energy that I especially experienced when I was an undergraduate at Santa Clara University. And that opened a door for me to find an identity as an active person of faith who also lived with some tensions that existed in the church. I didn't see it as a vocation at the time. I was a math major as an undergraduate and was maybe going to go to law school. But of course, none of that panned out. And I ended up being invited back to my alma mater to serve on part of a campus ministry team. And I had mentors that were really all about empowering women. And so I had to learn how to preach before I took a preaching class. The part of the being on the team at Santa Clara was you were up on the docket every 3 weeks preaching. And so I had colleagues that just were inspiring and challenging, and I fed off of it. I loved it.
You, when you were describing your early years at Santa Clara University, you've written that you were being invited simply to become. I love that. You were invited simply to become. How does that experience of becoming impact your role as a chaplain today?
I think that's one of the best gifts we can offer the people we work with, is to let them grow into the fullness of who they're meant to be. And to open that door. We're not in a kind of evaluative relationship with the people we work with. We're not grading them. I would even argue with faculty and staff, we're not their supervisors, we're not on their tenure committee. So the conversations that we can have with our community on a college campus are richer when the evaluation piece is absent, and the chaplain can just open the door for what is really tugging at people's hearts. And I know it was a gift that I had not expected to receive, to have someone say to me, we want you as a young mother to bring that to this work.
Hmm.
And if that means you need to go home and take care of your daughter, you go home and take care of your daughter, and then model that for the students, and they'll learn about that. And I mean, that was just so unexpected. And in the time, you know, in the mid 80s, I hadn't heard it before.
Hmm. Hmm. One of the things that I've always appreciated about you and your leadership is this way that you inspire others to be comfortable in your own skin and to own who you've been created to be. Can you share a little bit more about whether we call it self-security, confidence, faith, whatever word you might wish to have for it? Where did this come from, and how does it impact your leadership today?
Uh, you know, it evolved over time as I got older, for sure. I think anybody that served as a chaplain is used to the head tilt. Oh, really? What's that? You know, people don't understand what it is, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to explain what it is. Once I got comfortable with the art of repetition and being patient in that, that was helpful. I'm blessed with a sense of humor that I think I inherited from my dad, and I had 4 older brothers, so I really had to work hard to get my voice heard in our house. And so I think it's a combination of things, but I definitely allowed for myself to feel affirmed in who I was in this role. Definitely experienced that at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins was an unusual institution in that it didn't even have a religion department, not to mention a divinity school. So really the chaplaincy was it. And so I didn't have to prove anything there. I just had to do the work and let that work sort of, you know, flow over me and out of me. And I'll always be grateful for the chance to have that position there. And I think, you know, it was at an institution where science was God, and I was told pretty clearly, just take care of all that religious stuff over there, just keep it out of the way. And so I did it, but I also, you know, was fortunate enough to have a flourishing program, and I'll always be grateful for that.
Well, you mentioned it a moment ago about the push and pull around what is a chaplain, what do chaplains do, who are they, and I'd love to follow up on that. There's some real fascinating writings that we're seeing, especially here in the light of COVID-19, and the ways in which chaplains are engaging with those who are struggling in various ways. In some ways, the exposure of chaplaincy is on the rise in so many ways, but yet there's no standardized definition for what a chaplain is, and it's still very much an evolving concept. Just as someone who's been in this work for some time, and as someone that many of us look to as a leader in this work, how do you understand the role of chaplain, and in particular, the role of chaplain in higher education?
So I teach a class at the Divinity School on just this, and chaplaincy in the 21st century. And one of the exercises I do with the students on the very first day is I just say, let's, you know, pop, in the case of this last week, pop it into the chat. What are some words that you would ascribe to a chaplain and the role of the chaplain? And there's the ones you can predict, you know, the preacher, the convener of religious groups. And then after a while, you'll see chef, custodian, mover of chairs. and and I like to always start out by saying it's the nerve exposed to the pain. That's not my quote. It's from a colleague from years ago, but I think that's always been the definition I go back to. And now in this time of COVID, where there's the loss of life, there's the loss of a way of living life, a way of understanding what tomorrow might be or might not be. And I think we hold all that for our communities. And so it's these waves of loss that we're experiencing, whether it's through the pandemic, through now climate change made even more real in so many people's lives, and racial unrest and upending systems and looking at what we can do better. All of that, I feel like the chaplain, if you go through CPE, it's the non-anxious presence in the room, right? Well, I think chaplains right now have to try their hardest, and we're human, so we don't succeed every day, but to offer that kind of non-anxious presence in the face of what feels like an apocalypse. And I remember a student saying to me in an early Zoom call, he asked me, he said, is the world coming to an end? And I said, a world is. I think, I'm not going to lie, but let's talk about what another world can be, and what are you going to do in that world?
I want to remind everyone who's tuning in on Facebook Live, and as well as those who might be tuning in directly here on the Zoom webinar platform, if you have a question directly that you wish to bring to Chaplain Kugler, please type it into the Facebook comments. Please feel free to type it in here directly on the Zoom web platform. Our staff at Hendricks Chapel will get those to me, and I will do my best to get those to our guests. So again, a reminder, if you want to engage with our guests, type your questions into Facebook Live or directly here on the web platform. One of the things in the introduction that we talked about was, in terms of being chaplain at Yale University, first woman, first lay person, first Roman Catholic, and I'm sure there's lots of other firsts that don't make it into the bio.
First grandma.
Exactly. And there's this sense of being a trailblazer, and I want to read back to you something that you've written that I really, really appreciate. And this is a direct quote. It says, "I have built my career on a very simple belief. What matters most is to care for people in surprising ways, step outside of what is expected, and trust in the smallest of loving gestures offered with sincerity and without fanfare." I think about being at Yale as a place with a lot of traditions and, yes, a lot of fanfare. And I'm wondering as to how that works for you at Yale, and how have you found your way to navigate that by living into the culture that has received you, but also to embrace who you are.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey to just be myself there. And, I stepped into a role that was rich with tradition and with very, I'm the seventh one to serve. And there have been some very well-known chaplains before me. And I am in awe of the work that they did. But I also know that I am in my own shoes doing this work, walking this campus in the 21st century and bringing my own voice to that. And one of the first things that I did at the very beginning of the first academic year was have a big chili cook-off for the FROCOs, which are the RAs. They work with the first year students and their seniors. And it's something I traditionally did at Johns Hopkins, and I really wanted to bring that to Yale. Well, explaining that to the college deans and all, and I just said, you're just gonna have to trust me. It's really great. We're gonna make a bunch of chili. Everybody's gonna come and they're gonna relax. And all I want them to know is that the chaplain isn't scary. That's it. Take away one thing, is that we're human, accessible, not scary. And so we did it. We served, I wasn't yet in a chaplain residence, and so we served it on the steps of one of the chapels on campus, and people just came and they loved it. And it became a tradition, and Yale loves traditions. And so now we do it all the time, except this past year I couldn't do it. And it's funny, I do use humor a lot. Students will come in line and they'll look at the different chilies and they'll say, which one's the best? And I say, they're all equally mediocre. I just like to kind of tease them a little bit out of that, sort of intense way of walking through everything. There's so much pressure on a Yale student. They're your tomorrow's leader. you're going to have to find the answers, all of that. And I feel like we do them a disservice to not remember that they're human beings and that they need to be held literally or figuratively with that in mind, tenderly. This work is really about nurturing tomorrow's hope. And I don't want that. I don't want to be part of the pressure cooker that they're in. In my staff, we all feel the same way. We want to be sort of the relief valve, so that they can exhale a little bit and just be who they are and name what they're worried about.
You really, what I hear you doing is it helps us to think about what higher education actually is, what it's about. And I imagine that for many, when we think about higher education, that there's this pipeline, the sense of you go to school to get the best job you possibly can. And there's pressure to that. There's anxiety with that. And I think chaplains are one of those advocates that accompany students and to say, well, there's the head and the heart. And it's not just about acquiring information, and it's not just career preparation, but it's also about forming the human person, about transforming our communities, and about being beloved, and about who you are. And I think that sounds really challenging at a place like Yale with the expectations and the pressures. Could you share a little bit more about other strategies that you use at Yale, or perhaps others that you've observed from colleagues around the country around trying to push back against that sense that education is just simply this pressure cooker that people need to churn out, but instead that we bring some humanity to that? I'd love if you could share a little bit more, please.
Yeah, I think that the students that we work with that worked so hard to get to Yale, they have a whole resume that is stunning just before you even meet them. But they also are a 19-year-old, and they have developed in some ways to a point of excellence, but in other ways, they're still a 19-year-old, and helping them to remember that they're human, and that their aspirations actually may change as they grow to learn more about themselves, either through their coursework or through their involvement in other things. I mean, we've known students who have gotten involved in service work either in New Haven or abroad, and go do a complete turnaround for what it is they want to do with their lives. The big thing at Yale is, oh, do you go into finance? That's a conversation that happens in coffee shops and the dorm rooms and everywhere, and the pressure that people feel, and the financial pressure many people feel today in college is real. College is so expensive, and students want to be able to not have that kind of debt, either a burden on themselves or their parents, their families. We're seeing many more first-gen low-income students, and it's wonderful, but it's also a super challenge for them to feel comfortable in their own skin in this space. And I think chaplains have a really important role to play in both translating these institutions for students so that they know that they're welcome there, and what some of this, means, some of the decoding of tradition, but also advocating to the institution for what the students need and what they are actually bringing to this institution that makes it better.
When we think about your particular role too, I wanted to go back to when we were talking about your experience at Santa Clara, which sounded just wonderful and empowering, and in some ways a model of what you would hope. But we know that other women in leadership, women in religious leadership, have not had similar experiences. And I'm wondering if we could share a little bit more about, as you think about your career and think about colleagues and mentoring others, about your particular role, and about how perhaps you've encountered sexism in leadership, and how you empower others to overcome, and how you help to empower women, and quite frankly, how to help empower men as well. Could you share a little bit more?
Well, that's a big ask. Okay.
Yeah. Can you do that in about 2 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's all fixed. I mean, I think I have learned over the years, Brian, that women in leadership are not always listened to. And just because you have the title doesn't mean you have the ears. And it took me a while to really learn that, and then to figure out, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out another way to say this, or make cultivate relationships so that there's some trust, and even a buy-in that there's some authority to my voice. But I have to trust in my own authority before I can expect anyone else to trust that. And I think, women need to stick up for women and help them with that. But I also had male mentors. I had an Orthodox rabbi, Episcopal dean of a cathedral, both incredible men who believed in what I could bring to leadership. And those unexpected doors that open, or just the loving gesture. When I was trying to figure out if I would even take the job at Yale, I was very on the fence about it, and for a little bit. And could I do it? Could I step into these huge shoes? And it was an Orthodox rabbi that said, "Oh yeah, just bring your love. That's what's needed up there. Bring your love." And I always remember that when I have a bad day and I think I'm not being impactful, and this, what just happened in that meeting. And then I remember, just bring your love, just bring your love.
And when you talk about, joining in 2007, what has surprised you about the role? What did you expect? I mean, we've talked about, I've loved the way that you've shared about your interview experience, and what was, that discernment of, do I fit here? Or what does this look like? Just doing a bit of reflecting. What has surprised you? What has that looked like for you?
Well, one of the fun things that happened early on was a contingent of gentlemen from the class of 1950 came to visit me. And they were very close to their chaplain. Their chaplain was a very popular, the longest serving chaplain named Sidney Lovett. And so they came down to my office, and of course they see the good humor cart, because I have this ice cream cart sitting right outside the door of my office. And they also noticed that my office is all decorated and seems nice. And one of them had their wife with them, and they came in and they wanted to know what I was going to do, because they loved their chaplain, and what's different, and what can they expect. And I said, if I can have students graduating today that have the kind of affection for their chaplaincy experience, I will consider this a success. But it's not going to be one personality. It's a team of people, because this campus looks very different than it did in the 40s. And so I want them to have an experience of the chaplaincy. It doesn't necessarily need to be nestled into a memory of me as the main figure. And they became, some of my biggest fans. And when one of them passed away later that year, it was his wife that asked for me to come and do the Yale service for him. And I was very touched by that. And they regularly would check in, tell us what you're doing now. And so that surprised me, because I really thought there'd be a certain generation that, would not want to have anything to do with a woman chaplain, much less a Catholic laywoman. So that surprised me. I think the students that really wanted me to know that they just want to be treated like human beings and not like, super kids. I think that was a relief. I think it goes both ways. It was very much a relief, because I could be myself and they could be themselves when they would visit our office. We made sure that the office felt like a place that was welcoming to all people, and it didn't really matter if you were part of a faith or a spiritual community. We also wanted to make sure our office wasn't just a place you went when something bad happened. We wanted to make sure it was a place that you felt you could just go and exhale or process a romantic conundrum of some sort, just with a grown-up. And that kind of stuff, I didn't know what to expect. I honestly didn't know what to expect. And I'd be lying if I'd said I wasn't nervous. Of course I was nervous. But I also, by the time I came to Yale, I knew who I was.
Mm. I couldn't get through this conversation without asking more about the good humor cart. And, as someone born and raised in Wisconsin, and I could eat ice cream 365 days a year, I don't think we can have a conversation together without asking about it, the origins of it, the stories around it, for our viewers about the good humor cart.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So the Good Humor Cart was something that I used to rent every time the first year class would move in at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And it was sort of this tongue-in-cheek way of saying to the parents, have a free ice cream. You've been writing checks all day, everybody loosen up. And we would have it just as a celebratory object during move-in. But during move-in, during 2001, for some reason, the company that we rented the cart from didn't show up to pick up the cart. So we still had it at the Interfaith Center at Johns Hopkins. And when September 11th, 2001 happened, and so many people were coming in filled with such grief and anxiety, that Good Humor Cart became this odd, sacred object. It was very familiar to the students, and so they felt sort of drawn to it and would grab an ice cream. Our Muslim students who were scared, they were loitering around it, and I just kind of observed, and I thought, I'm going to keep this thing. And so I did. And when I interviewed up at Yale 6 years later, that was a question that was asked of me in a very fancy Yale home by students. I had asked to be interviewed by students. There was a search committee that was not going to let that happen. They were being very careful and rightly so, observing the confidentiality of the process. But as I went through the process and I started to feel like this maybe will happen, I wanted to meet students. I wanted to know that, I could feel a connection with them because I felt such a deep love for my students at Johns Hopkins. And I could not imagine taking a job and not having a sense of the flesh and bones of the people. And so they arranged for some graduate and undergraduate students to meet me in one of the Yale college homes. And a student said, what was it? I Googled you or something. And I have a question. Okay. And I remember thinking, and he said, yeah, it has to do with the Good Humor Cart. And I just thought, oh no, okay, this is it. I've been found out. I'm too silly. This is not going to work in this fancy place. And I said, yeah, I do have a Good Humor Cart. You want to know if it was true? I said, yeah, I do. It's right outside my office. And do you want to know why? And he said, oh, yeah, but I mostly want to know if you're going to bring it up here. Yeah. And I said, yeah. And I knew then, okay, humans are humans, And that ice cream cart has been an important thing for the Yale chaplain's office. It's definitely one of the first things if you ask a student, oh, do you know about the chaplain's office? Yeah, what do you know about it? They have the Good Humor Cart over there.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I mean, and it's insightful that chaplaincies look differently in different places at different times with different people. And I'd love to kind of scan out a little bit as we think about, we mentioned here at the beginning about your role as president with two of our professional organizations, both NACOOK and Akura, and having a sense of the bigger picture. And I'm wondering about, in this moment that we find ourselves here of COVID-19 and many other crises that our country and world are facing, but chaplaincy has been changing for long before 2020. Could you share about some reflections about where chaplaincy, from your point of view, has come, where it is, and perhaps where it might be going?
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much because I have seen it really change. I mean, in the early times for me, it was very white, very Christian, and very Protestant.
Right.
And just this last February, before everything had to sort of shut down, there was a gathering of chaplains in Hartford, and uh, to look out on that room, that conference space, and see chaplains of all faiths, many different colors, gender differences. I mean, it made my hair stand on end with just such wonder. I was grateful that I could see it. I was grateful I was still around to see it, and it just kind of tickled me because I kind of stopped going to national gatherings a few years back, and not for any other reason, not for any particular reason, except that, I got, my schedule became too weird, but those national gatherings were so important as I was beginning, because that's where I found my friends. They were the other people that you didn't have to explain what you did to, and you could talk shop, and, it just meant the world to me. But it was so, homogeneous at a certain point. And then to have this evolution where, you have chaplaincies that were able to find the resources to add a Muslim chaplain and a Hindu person and have some Buddhist chaplaincy. I mean, it's just, it's stunning and beautiful. And, that is one of the things when I look back on my career, and I just feel so lucky that I was working at a time where I could see that change. And maybe be a small part of midwifing that in, but it really, it's beautiful, and I'm hopeful about it, but with an asterisk. I worry because of COVID and because of what's happened with college and university budgets, and you worry that, is the religious life program going to be one of the first that's sort of, um, in jeopardy? I don't know. I pray not. I think that, as you said earlier, chaplains are called upon now more than ever. And I think it'll hold. I hope it'll hold. It's definitely not the same thing as student affairs. It's a broader vocation and must be held by people who are trained in the field.
And I think one of the things that, when we talk about this moment of COVID-19 around not just public health in the sense of our physical bodies, but mental, emotional, spiritual, and we're now starting to see here 6-7 months into this pandemic around the consequences of isolation and separation and what that looks like, and how religious and spiritual communities for thousands of years have been able to breach the traditional boundaries of physicality. And I'm wondering about these broader conversations around health, well-being. As you think about your students at Yale, and we've talked about some of the pressures that come with being naturally a student at Yale, but right now, being a student in the context of COVID-19, being a student at a time where the economy is significantly disrupted, how do you as a chaplain engage, particularly in terms of health and well-being, and perhaps some counsel? Because I know some of the people that tune in here are parents and loved ones of students. What counsel might you have for, as we invite our students not just simply to do good, but to be well?
Yeah, two things come to mind. Again, I think back to early conversations I was having in March and April, when I think we were in very much crisis mode, and the idea of how do you live with uncertainty, and the prolonged uncertainty now that we have. But I remember when those conversations first started, I went right back to something that happened in my own life. I had been diagnosed in 2000 and early 2001 with cancer. And I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which meant 9 months of chemo and then 6 weeks of radiation. And as a young mother, I had two daughters at home. The thought of, I can't make a plan. This is the first time in my life where, no, I can't think about, what the summer is going to look like or what even next month is going to look like. And that took on a new kind of dimension spiritually for me. What does it mean to live in the moment and to ask of yourself, I'm just going to get through this day and whatever is going to happen this day, and lift it up, put some of it away, stuff that was scary and unpleasant that I had to encounter that day, and then go to the next one. Now we're in a real spiritual discipline because this is going on, and it's going to go on and on. But the little things you can hold and control, I think is so important. And what the kinds of conversations I'm having with students about what I'm learning, even in an interior way, is how to handle my body and stress in my body. And when I surrender to the phone, like first thing in the morning, no, not a good idea. Shouldn't be the first thing you reach for. The list in your mind of everything that you're worried about or everything you got to do shouldn't be the first thing you do when you're opening your eyes in the morning. The first thing you need to do is find the window and look out the window and breathe and pray and look out the window. The list will be there, the phone will be there, but you need to have agency over your own body and how you're going to start your day, rather than with the adrenaline rush and the clinching and all the things and all the yelling that's happening in, social media and the news. Take that quiet moment first thing. And it's finding those little things, what in your life allows for just some joy. You are permitted joy in the midst of all of this. And what, it's different things for different people, but you are allowed. You are allowed joy.
I love what you're saying about this. It's in some ways paradoxical that oftentimes we think it's crisis or fulfillment, or crisis or joy, but that these can exist together in this really profound paradoxical way. And also what I hear you saying is something we've been doing here at Hendricks Chapel lately, is talking about not just to-do lists, but also to-be lists, and to remember that you're human beings and not human doings, and to start with who you are, and to receive grace and comfort in that. And so I really appreciate that counsel. And I'm wondering what that looks like in your own life, Sharon, about, you have a high profile position at a, high profile school with a great deal of pressure long before 2020. And now here we are, global pandemic, thinking about a summer of racial unrest. We have climate change. We have a national election coming up. And the list goes on. And would you be willing to share a little bit more about how you center yourself, your own spiritual practice, and about how you nourish your spirit and sustain your soul in the midst of so much taking place?
It's multifaceted, I would say. I think my husband and I are both feeling blessed that we, have a 38-year marriage, and we are thankful every day that we're still crazy about each other, and this being together day in and day out, and we've had so many dinners together that far outrank the 38 years that we have been married, because I usually work a lot of nights. And so that's been a gift. And he'd be the first to tell you that I've had a blast just trying out my culinary chops and experimenting. And so I find that settles me and relaxes me a bit to not fret that I don't have all the ingredients for something I'm thinking of cooking and see what happens. And I've just never had that. That's just been a luxury. And to have that has been great. To be part of a worshiping community on campus, both at the Divinity School and the University Church, has fed me daily, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to carve out that time to just do that and to surrender to something so much bigger, and to do it alongside in Zoom other people who are doing the same thing, and they may be administrators or faculty or students. That's been important. And finding reasons to really just laugh like crazy at something silly has felt super cathartic, because the worry's always there. The stress is always going to be knocking at the door, and sometimes it gets let in. But those practices, and I have a dog that needs a lot of walking, and thankfully I have the space to walk him, and that helps me as well.
That's wonderful. We're coming to the end of our time together, and I wanted to thank you so much for being with us, and to thank all of our guests who've tuned in on Facebook and here on Zoom. And this final question I wanted to ask is, thinking again about this time of crisis, and I'm very convinced that crisis can give birth to clarity, and then in the midst of crisis, things become clear that perhaps otherwise would not have. And as we think about the title of this program, and Matters That Matter, and having conversation about matters that actually matter, I'm wondering, Chaplain Kugler, about the clarity that you're hoping our students might receive during this time, so that they might reflect on matters that matter and might engage with matters that matter. What are you hoping that can become more clear for our students during this time? And again, thank you for being with us.
It's been a pleasure, Brian. I hope that students emerge from this time valuing telling the truth to each other and demanding that of authority. I have felt a certain kind of freedom in just saying, I'm going to tell the truth to you. And in meetings that I'm in, even administrative meetings. And I hope that that's what students take away, that they, we are, one of my favorite, Joan Chittister, the Benedictine sister, one of my favorite quotes of hers is, there's glory in the clay of us, which means we're always becoming, and we're learning more about the truth. And I want them to have that, to know that this is ongoing, but they are entitled to the truth, and they need to be truthful as well. And we'll get to something else, and it'll be better, because it'll be built on that love and that truth and who we're becoming.
Chaplain Sharon Kugler, thank you so much for being with us. On a personal note, you've been a friend and a mentor and an inspiration to me and countless others that are engaged in this work around the country. And I know I speak on behalf of many that say thank you for all that you have done, are doing, and will continue to do. So thank you so much. And thank you to all who have joined in this evening. We know that there's a lot going on these days, and to come together, whether it's virtually or physically, it is just always good to be together. So thanks to all once again for being with us here for this Matters That Matter program from Hendricks Chapel at Syracuse University. We wish you the fullness of health and hope. Have a great night, and God bless.
God bless.